folks.
Okay,
there you
we
go.
are recording.
Good.
Susan, I'm going to send you I'm going to put in the chat box the invitation to this event. Does somebody want to post it to the listserv?
I could do that, but I wanted to know if, Bob, did you use the link I just sent?
No, I used the one that Alan sent. I hypertexted and it worked.
Okay, the link I just put in the chat box is the link for this
Oh,
meeting because
good.
I
Okay.
pulled it out of this meeting. So
Okay, I will
Alan or
copy
Susan,
that.
would somebody put it on the listserv?
Yes, I will do that now.
Okay.
Now, hold on just a moment. I am admitting some people from the waiting room. Okay, go ahead. Oh, hold on. I'm going to put up the slides. I can do this. Hang on just a moment here.
I have somebody in the waiting room waiting to get in also.
Hang on.
Lauren,
I just got in.
okay. Lauren? No, Lauren, we can't hear you. Do you have the microphone on your computer turned on? Yes. You could try calling in, like you could keep the video, but you could also call in so we can hear you. I'm not the tech person here, so.
You sound like you really know what you're doing, though.
I do not.
You deny knowing what you're doing. Okay, hold on. Okay, is the slide up?
Yes.
Okay.
Very good. Matt, I'm going to go ahead and get started.
Yes.
Okay. Welcome everybody to the Adhd session on social isolation before, during, and after COVID. And let's hope after is the operative word here. My name is Robert Lubin. I am the co-chair of Adhd Inclusion Advisory Committee, along with Alan Levitt, together with Susan Kimmel and Emily Novick. We represent the IAC with Adhd. The second slide, Matt, will be the names and titles of the panelists. There. So Lauren M. Dursky is a child adolescent psychiatrist and has many years of experience in the psychiatry field. Matt Beal is a professor and vice chair for child adolescent psychiatry at MedStar Georgetown. Dina Goldsmith is retired from a long career as a trauma-informed therapist practicing long-term psychotherapy using mindfulness, relationship building, and body-centered approaches. Renat Kissen is a inclusion and belonging specialist at the Jewish Federation, Greater Washington. Rivka Solomon is a writer, disability advocate, independent organizer, focusing on disability, chronic illness, and women. In addition, she is an event and community organizer at Massachusetts ME/CFS and FM Association, whatever all that means. And finally, Judy Tyson is a disability self-advocate, co-director of Potomac Grove Psychiatry in Gaithersburg. And I'm not sure if Judy is going to be able to make it or not. We'll find out. The third slide, Matt, will be 3 questions that were posed to each of these professionals and advocates that we've asked them to take a few minutes and talk about their experience. How has COVID impacted each of them personally, or the people they work with in terms of feeling isolated or mental health issues? Secondly, what coping mechanisms, techniques, or new services, for example, Zoom, telemedicine, or Instacart, did you or your patients use during the pandemic, and which would you like to see continued in the new normal? Finally, how have your experiences with Adhd Shalom or any other religious or educational social organization changed during the pandemic? Is there greater or lesser connection or sense of belonging? Thank you, Matt. So now we're going to have a round of presentations from our panel. Unfortunately, we can't have them all in one room in a round table, but we're going to go alphabetically and ask each one to address the set of questions, starting with Lauren M. Dursky. Lauren, welcome.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Not so well.
Can you hear me okay?
No.
Okay. I'm on my phone and is that better?
No.
Not loud enough.
No,
Yes.
it's better.
Now?
No.
No. Is this better? Is this better?
It's funny, Lauren, you're not muted on either the phone or the computer connection. All right, pretend we're rebellious teenagers and you're shouting at us.
Yeah, I don't do that. Okay. So first of all, I wanted to first thank you for including me in this. And I do want to make the note that child and adolescent psychiatrists are also trained as adult psychiatrists, fully trained adult psychiatrists first. And so we see adults, children, and adolescents. Can you wave if you totally cannot hear me? I'm talking loud. And I think that there are, I did actually want to talk about some of the issues with children and adolescents during COVID and the social isolation. So, it's been an interesting ride, I think, for all of them and all of us. For children, I think that the children that we see as child and adolescent psychiatrists a lot are children with ADHD. And the school situation of doing Zoom school has been extremely difficult for these children. And as you might imagine, the adolescents as well, because social interaction, in-person social interaction is so important in their social development, it's been also extremely difficult on them. Some families have, made pods, and that's made it a little bit better. But the schooling this year, I think, for all of the kids has been very, very difficult. And there's one exception to that where the Zoom school has, I think, been helpful. So kids that we see that are on the Asperger's or autistic spectrum, for them, I think the less social input from the screening school has been better. And so for a lot of those kids, they do better in this model. So I just wanted to, there's no one answer. Is it easier? Is it harder? It's easier for some people. It's harder for some people. And I'm not even mentioning the challenges of being a parent during COVID, which is a whole huge problem. When I think of mental health, structure is part of mental health. And for kids, school is their structure. And so the structure of school has been, all kinds of ways difficult and different this year. And it's caused a lot of challenges. There actually was an article in the Wall Street Journal yesterday about the increasing, really the mental health crisis that's happened during COVID and now afterwards. So I want to put those issues out there. I also want to note, I personally have been volunteering for the last year on the physician support line. And, we are talking a little bit about invisible disabilities. And for physicians, there are so many stigmas and pushes against getting help it's been remarkable for me to see I've been regularly volunteering for the last year, and physicians are really struggling, not just because of COVID, but COVID's just been, as it has for everybody else, an additional stress and additional pressure. And I think we tend to forget that physicians and really all kinds of helpers and carers may need help and support themselves. And we actually have made it very hard for physicians to do that. So I just wanted to add that little piece. So.
Thank you, Lauren. That very insightful. And we know that Aunt Shalom has had its own committee helping advise the congregation about COVID type issues, but I'm not sure we got into the things you were talking about. Matt, from your standpoint, how has the lockdown affected you?
Thanks, Bob. And as Lauren said, I'm really glad to be included this morning. Thanks, everyone. So just to add to Lauren's perspectives, I have the opportunity to be a psychiatrist practicing at a academic medical center. So I have the chance to, in my clinical practice, which is about a third of my life, I see a diplomat's family 1 hour and a homeless family the next hour. And so I've had a perspective, I think, on the pandemic that's been really interesting from the perspective of socioeconomic status and race, particularly in the context of everything else going on in the last year and a half in the country. And then we run a school-based mental health program in DC that provides mental health services in about 55 public schools, primarily on the eastern half of DC. So really working with the most underserved children and families in DC, and the work we do clinically is really, as Lauren picked up on, is really multi-generational. We don't see kids in isolation. When we see a child presenting for a concern, we really insist on working with the entire family and trying to understand the family context and the ecology in which a child may be struggling, and really identify what are the strengths going on in that family and child as well, in order to try to generate some positive change. Some of the national data that I think that was most telling to me, and that was really borne out in our work over the last year and a half locally, is that the best indicator of how children have done during the pandemic is how their parents are doing, and how their caregivers are doing. And when parents and caregivers have been overwhelmed by stress, by their own mental health challenges, which oftentimes have gone unaddressed, those are the situations in which kids have struggled most. Situations in which parents have been able to reckon with the challenges of COVID and access resources that they need, their children, for the most part, have been buffered from some of the more intense mental health challenges that COVID has presented. Another thing, sort of on a global context to me, that's been really stood out for me over the last year and a half has been, I think that in general, we've been on a trajectory in our culture, in our society, of slow reduction in stigma around mental health issues. And I think that trajectory steepened quickly, and that stigma really is rapidly declining, particularly among young people, in talking about and in seeking out help for mental health challenges, which is one of the pieces of very good news in the midst of lots of overwhelmingly scary news. I think, and I think that we see that in schools, we see that in other community-based settings in which we work, that the willingness of young people to talk about, seek help for, and provide support to their peers around challenges related to their mental health has never been more prevalent, and that presents this opportunity to build upon that stigma reduction by stepping up our ability to provide resources, particularly in under-resourced settings. And I think that one of the challenges that those of us who work in mental health are acutely aware of is the under-availability of access to care, that there are not enough providers. You name the profession that is related to mental health support, and there aren't enough of us. And we're overwhelmed by demand, we're under-supported by payment, and the idea that someone has to wait 3 or 4 or 5 months to see a child psychiatrist or to see a geriatric psychiatrist, to wait 1 or 2 months to see a general psychiatrist when the stress or the crisis can be so acute is just untenable. And so I think one of the challenges and opportunities coming out of COVID, and I'm sure we'll talk more about going forward in the next part of the conversation, is how can we get smarter about strategies for access to care for particularly for underserved populations. How can we use what we've learned in this sort of the changes and adaptations we've had to make on the fly over the past 16, 18 months and pick out the best of those going forward so that we can, on a population level, improve access to care in a way that's going to influence more and more people and more young people. Because doing that, particularly during childhood, changes lifespan health. And so it's such a critical opportunity for us to respond to as a community, as a population. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt. That's somewhat depressing, but also somewhat encouraging. And so speaking of encouraging, Dennis Goldsmith, welcome.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. So I worked a couple different places. The most recent place I worked was a private practice as part of a nonprofit. So we accepted all kinds of insurance, including Medicare and Medicaid and private insurance. So I saw a wide diversity of people in terms of their age, their ethnicity, their religion, and mental health diagnosis and disability needs. So that really gave me kind of a panoramic view. So just to build on some of the things that Matt and Lauren also said, parents who had children with ADHD when Zoom were having a really hard time. And I found that sometimes my sessions were interrupted because the children were having problems and they would run into the room. But in a way that was valuable because I got a window into how my adult clients work with their children or not so well. So one thing that I really want to build on is there was a sense that we were all in this together. A lot of times, just by the definition, the role of a therapist and a client is hierarchical. That still is true on Zoom during this pandemic, but we were all in it together. Therapists and healthcare professionals of all kinds, every profession was at risk for getting the coronavirus, sometimes in ways known or unknown. And I think in some ways that helped our clients because it was a humbling experience. And I think it made us as therapists perhaps a bit more relatable. And I think there was real therapeutic value in that. So, while still maintaining boundaries and an appropriate profession. Also being on Zoom, the state of Maryland at least allows Zoom sessions prior to the pandemic for private insurance, but not for Medicare and Medicaid. And then there's been a waiver for that. And I hope that as this pandemic winds down, that clients who have Medicaid and Medicare will continue to be able to use Zoom. It just makes it's not as good as in person, but it makes it so much easier. So a couple of things. There were a small number of people that this pandemic has actually been helpful for. And those are people who are very introverted people who were more comfortable being separate and felt that they had more control. I saw that also with parents of a small number of kids. Maybe they were being bullied at school or they had some social problems, and now they could get away from that. Kids who were self-starters have done better than the pandemic. And I happen to know some people whose kids, in fact, are not going back to school, even though things are now opening up, because it just works better for them to be at home. Those people are in the minority. Most people need the social connection. I will share with you an example of one client I work with who is an ICU nurse at a local hospital. So she would work 3 12-hour shifts, and she was assigned to the COVID unit sometimes, and it was very grueling for her. A woman in her mid-60s, but she had a long history of social anxiety. So on the one hand, this pandemic made it harder for her because she was even more isolated. At the same time, she said she was isolated before the pandemic and she had certain coping skills that allowed her to get through it because she had already developed somewhat of a comfort level with herself and she could use those skills. So it's just very mixed. Another population I worked a bunch were DC-based millennials in their 20s and 30s who were very much in a happy hour culture in DC. Many of these people were in human rights nonprofits or they were lawyers at law firms, and their social life just went out the window. So that was a whole other factor. So those are the people who were not going to necessarily follow the rules of the pandemic so much, that they were going to be more likely to pod together. Some of them might move home with their parents just to be around people, just different ways of trying to manage. So that's it for me for now.
Thanks, Dina. I think Judy is not going to be able to be with us, at least not now. So Rivka, we have a video that you did, but would you rather be live in person?
Thank you for asking. I'm torn. I don't know what to do. The truth is I'm not doing well. I have a disability and it affects my cognitive abilities. So I am not doing well today. So let's try the video if that's okay. The video. So we recorded the video in anticipation that I might not be doing well, but I do think what's very interesting is I have a completely different perspective from everybody who's spoken so far. Let's try the video.
Okay, folks, stand by just a moment while I push enough buttons to play the video.
If that doesn't work, I will do my best.
Okay, hold on here. Let's see what this button does.
Well, obviously,
That's the wrong video. Wait just a moment here. Hang on, it's on the screen. I gotta find it and share it, and then it will work. I have it on my second screen. Hold on just a moment here.
That's okay. I can dive in.
Now, hang on. I got this thing showing on one screen and not on the other. Do you think Zoom itself, the software, has been adversely affected, that it's suffering stress and not doing well?
I think Zoom is going through the roof and making money. I think everyone lives on Zoom these
Yeah.
days. And so the
That's
question is, though, who's done the tutorials and not me?
That's okay. I think I should.
Rivka, I apologize. I've
No.
got you on one screen, but it's not sharing. If you could please talk, I'd appreciate
Yeah.
it.
You want me to try to share? I think I might.
Okay, okay, hold on just a minute.
That's okay. I'll just dive in. I don't.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead then.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me on this wonderful and important panel. So as I said, I have a different perspective. Hold on just one second. I'm going to get my notes up. So I'm speaking as a person with a disability who has been very sick for decades. And so my perspective is the opposite, which is that when the whole world went on Zoom, my world opened up. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of a background, which is that when I was 21, I got an infectious illness. I got mononucleosis from the Epstein-Barr virus. And I became so weak, I could barely stand up and brush my teeth. And that went on for a year. And after a year, I became well enough to resume my relatively resume my normal life. I was going to school, working, exercising, but then I got a second infection. I got pneumonia, and bam, I was back to being bedridden. And that was 30 years ago. And for the past 30 years, I have spent much of my life in or near bed, too weak to function. Now, this is a physical illness, not a psychological illness. I was just diagnosed with post-viral illness. They called it ME, or myalgic encephalomyelitis. And that's the real name for chronic fatigue syndrome, which we don't use anymore. And there are 2.5 million of us in the US and 24 million around the globe. But there's a whole family of people with my similar type of disability, that we all have post-infectious illnesses, and that includes chronic Lyme disease. The infection came from obviously the Lyme bacteria. Fibromyalgia, a lot of autoimmune illnesses are like my illness, multiple sclerosis, and now we've got long COVID. So people who got the COVID-19, about up to 10 to 30% of them are not getting better, and they are staying sick with what they're calling long COVID, and their symptoms are almost identical to mine, which is unrelenting exhaustion, cognitive dysfunction or brain fog, and what we call post-exertional malaise, which is small amounts of energy output can really floor us and send us back to being bedridden for days, weeks, or months. So before the pandemic happened, I was already unable to leave my home and bed. I was often too sick, in fact, to get to my synagogue, which is the Jewish community of Amherst. And then the pandemic happened and everybody shifted to Zoom. So right before the pandemic, my father passed away, and suddenly, thanks to Zoom, I got to recite the Mourner's Kaddish with a minyan because I was able to join my synagogue. I got to attend lunch and learns and Shabbat morning services, and I had no energy. I didn't need any energy to drive anywhere, and I could lie down during the gatherings and services. And the truth is, now that the world is opening back up, I'm sad and worried that because the pandemic is ending and the world is opening again, synagogues around the country, and more than just synagogues, all these places that connected via Zoom are now going to be closed again to people with disabilities. So we're going to go back to being isolated. And I just want to give you one example, and then I'll close. So this past year, well, first I'll say that I have missed most Passover Seders over the past 3 decades because I've been sick. And finally this year I got to attend 2 via Zoom, and I got to attend the same way everybody else did, virtually. So I was equal to everybody. But at the end of the Seder, both Seders, the Seder leader said, "Okay, we'll see you next year in person. How wonderful." And my heart sank, because that meant I wouldn't get to participate in that Seder next year. That's it.
Well, thank you very much. And I think we're going to talk about what future trends might look like.
I should mention one thing, which is that I did write about this exact thing, and it was published in the Washington Post, and also the PBS NewsHour interviewed me, and I can put links to that in the chat. But those were very well received and spread, all around the country. They sort of went viral, so that was very exciting. Thank you.
I have not seen those, so I'd appreciate the links to both of those. We're going to take the second round of questions about coping mechanisms that the professionals have worked with their clients. And that you would like to see continue post-COVID. Lauren?
Can you hear me now?
Much better.
Okay, good. So I, amusing little story. I had dinner with some friends just pre-COVID, and just as things were starting to shut down, and we had a conversation, and I said, "Oh, I think, online telemedicine just doesn't work as well, and I can't see myself doing it." About 3 weeks after that, I signed up with a medical program called Doxy, which is very similar to Zoom, but it has some features that are preferable for physicians, useful for physicians. And so I have been seeing patients via telemedicine for the entire year. And I've seen all ages. It is certainly not the same as in person. But for this particular, not just for this, for certain kinds of things, I've spent a lot of time over the course of the year thinking about how does telemedicine work best? For what patients is it helpful? Obviously, as Matt noted, there's a very serious problem of access in our country. And I'm quite sure that telemedicine is going to be a part of our toolkit going forward. It's so useful and it's so helpful for people to be able to see you from different areas. I have patients, my office is in Chevy Chase. I have patients that come in to see me from Olney, and that may be necessary to see them in person some, but not all the time. So I expect that Zoom and telemedicine are going to be part of our toolkit going forward. And the real question is going to be, what is its best use, and what is, which times do you really need to see somebody in person, and which times can you do it virtually? So that's sort of where I am. I've been thinking about how I'm going to go back to my private practice, and and I'm sort of sorting that out for myself. And I imagine ultimately there will be some guidelines from our professional associations as well. So just as a comment to Rivka, I don't think things are going to go back to exactly the way they were. I think there's going to be some more level of use of virtual tools to be more inclusive. So that's just my perspective. So I'm gonna leave it there. Turn it back to you, Bob.
And I'm going to turn it over to Matt.
Thanks, Bob. So fully agree with Lauren. I think that telemedicine is going to be always part of the way that we practice. I think that as Lauren has patients from Olney to Chevy Chase, we've for years had patients taking 2 and 3 buses to get from Southeast Washington to our clinic at Georgetown. That's absurd. And it's discriminatory. And telemedicine is a way to end that discriminatory practice, and we'll do that. I think that also, as Lauren said, I think that particularly for some, I don't remember if it was Lauren or Dina, but particularly for adolescent and young adult patients, I think communicating by video is lingua franca. It's they're most comfortable, perhaps most transparent and honest as well. And so I think that it actually may be a better clinical tool, and it's up to us, the folks who like the old way, to adapt. It's not up to our patients to adapt. I certainly don't love practicing on video. I find it incredibly draining, but I think that a lot of my patients prefer it. And so I've got to adjust, not them. The other things that I think maybe can and should change is, I think, and Rivka's story made me think about this, is in all aspects of healthcare, we underutilize the expertise of people with lived experience in supporting people with chronic health conditions, whether those are physical health or mental health conditions. And I think one of the avenues towards closing the gaps in access to care and mental health is broadening the professional core, to include not just psychologists and psychiatrists and therapists of various backgrounds, but also paraprofessionals and peer support workers who have lived experience and who can get trained in specific clinical kinds of skills, but who have something intangible that none of us, or most of us sitting in our offices, don't have, which is firsthand experience with conditions that can be really difficult. And I think there's an opportunity to use technology to really totally expand the way we think about mental health care. And that includes both the wise and savvy use of apps and other technology tools that continue to be developed. Like there's a new one coming out every week now. Some of them are very, very, very well done and useful, but need a human element to come to life and to be most helpful to people, whether that's with a clinician or whether that's with a peer who's trained. I think those are strategies that are going to expand coming out of this so that we can reduce some of the terrible problems in access to care. And so I think Zoom and other technologies are going to be part of solutions that we need to work hard to develop in the field, and not just retreat as fast as possible to our version of in-person Seder, Rivka, to the version for mental health professionals of come, I'll see you back in the office, and make an appointment, and I'll see you in 3 months. We just can't go back to that. It's too unsatisfying. And Rivka, I really hope also that from a Jewish perspective that all of our planning going forward is going to keep Zoom in mind, because of the ways that's expanded access. My oldest is we're planning for his for him to become bar mitzvah in December, and that's part of our planning. Is we're considering that's going to be part of how we celebrate, because we know that's going to expand the access to people who we want to be there.
That's interesting, because we've seen so many bar bat mitzvahs over the year with family that perhaps from Israel, from California, who otherwise might have to struggle to get to an event. And here they are, assuming they're willing to participate on Shabbat with video and everything. I had a funny experience. I needed to have an appointment for an endoscopy. And I called the provider up, and they asked if I wanted to do that by Zoom or in person. And I don't think they understood that I needed to do that in person, but that's okay. Dina, you're up.
Thank you. I really want to build on what both Lauren and Matt said. They both made some really, really good points. In terms of coping mechanisms, there's a cultural piece to this that I want to identify, because I had the experience, first of all, of working with a number of Republicans who were Trump supporters. It wasn't only kind of liberal people like most of us. I also had the experience of working with people from Africa and other countries, and certain religions as well that are very prescriptive. I'll just put it that way. So dealing with the coronavirus and what it means and how to be out in the world is very culturally bound to a degree. How you work with someone from Africa, or honestly, someone who is Mormon or Hindu, for example, is very different from a white middle class or upper middle class Jewish client. So I had to learn how to pivot even more than I learned how to pivot, and make sure that I did my homework outside of my sessions so that I wasn't ignorant about these differences. And those differences were very important to me in creating a safe space for people. I think that's one of the things we can do on Zoom that I didn't realize before, is on Zoom, you can actually feel the bond and the connection between people one-on-one on Zoom. And there can be real rapport building, and the relationship can be cultivated and developed in a way that is healing. And in some ways, it's a more honest, open look into a person's life. You can see their children. You can see their cats walking across the keyboard, or their dogs wanting to be let in and out over and over again, right? Or children bursting into the room. One client of mine, his son came in with a toilet paper gun and shot it at me during the session. And we talked a lot about that son. And it was just really cool to see him and kind of meet him briefly. My African client from Sierra Leone, it was very important to her that I meet her children, okay? Very important to me. Most clients wouldn't want me to meet their children, but for her, it's almost like I was invited to be part of the family for the time we worked together. So I think this pandemic, in some ways, it closed the gap a little bit. And I agree with Matt and Lauren. I don't think we used a HIPAA compliant Zoom, which is different than the kind of Zoom we're using now. I don't think it's going to go away. And I'm hoping for public insurances like Medicare and Medicaid that they are going to continue those waivers and not require in-person services because it is so much more inclusive of all kinds of people. So thank you.
Yes, and I do want to emphasize the point that Matt made about lived experience. From the perspective of the Inclusion Committee, we're very much supportive of that notion, concept of nothing about us without us. So we encourage certainly people to join our committee. It's an open committee. There's no requirements other than interest if you have a disability or not. And so we want to include people as much as possible to the extent that they're able to. Matt, we're going to go to the interview with Renat.
Yes, stand by here.
You had it up before, so and we know you can do it again.
Yep. Do you,
Actually,
okay.
okay, if we still have Rivka with us, if she wanted to comment on the second question, because we didn't show her response that had been in her video.
Sure, I would like to. So the question is sorry, the question again is what
Coping skills during that you've used during the COVID pandemic, and which of those would you want to continue going forward?
Right. Okay. So thank you. I want to say a couple things. One is telemedicine has been a freaking godsend. I mean, you can imagine what it's like to be too sick to get to the doctor, right? I mean, and this is my life, and this is the life of many, many people with chronic illnesses and disabilities, right? We can't get there. And then, of course, Matt pointed out that there's a socioeconomic component. So the people that can't afford to get there, let me go back to gallery. The people who can't afford to get there, or the people who have to take 3 buses to get there, et cetera. So telemedicine has been unbelievably helpful. And of course, as someone with a compromised immune system, I and my partner haven't been able to go into grocery stores. So having grocery delivery has been incredibly helpful. The last point I want to make is a distinction. There is a distinction between live streaming, like, for example, a synagogue service, and live streaming, which is unidirectional, and you are just watching something like you're watching a play or something, versus participatory, multi-directional, multi-access inclusion. So for those of us at the Jewish Community Center, my shul, we are discussing the difference between unidirectional and multi-access inclusion. And something like Zoom allows for multi-access inclusion, but it's going to be interesting to see what these quote unquote hybrid or multi-access services look like, because am I going to see the backs of people's heads? Am I going to see people's faces when they're speaking? Are they going to see my face when I'm speaking? So that's going to be interesting. The way that we are putting it in my synagogue is we have one person on our committee, our disability committee, who said that it's not about inclusion, it's about non-exclusion. And he said that by making the bima inaccessible and no wheelchair ramp up to the bima, you are excluding a group of people. And so he said that if you build into the framework, if you build into when you're setting something up, a non-exclusion attitude, then that will give you the best results. So I was just interesting to me to hear him speak that way. So he is a bedridden, when he's not bedridden, wheelchair user with a spinal cord injury.
Excellent points. And certainly those are discussions we're having now with our synagogue. And again, I think that some of those issues are brought to the forefront when people like yourself and others who have disability are part of the process and included in the discussions and asked for their insights as well. I know one person who would have liked to have been here is not here, and she's raised some of those very same issues about looking at the back of somebody's head versus their face. So that's certainly on our plate to deal with. And thank you for speaking up. Now, Matt, it's time.
Okay, does everybody see the video?
Obviously, the pandemic affected everyone. People with
I'm sorry, I'm not hearing anybody. Do you see the video?
Yes.
Okay, and do you hear it?
Yes.
disabilities, people without disabilities, people from all over different communities, and we should expect the same for the Jewish community in general, and in particular the Jewish community of our area. I think that there are many challenges that we were exposed to new challenges that people with disabilities experienced, or they were there, but they increased to the extent that people had to make a lot of adjustments that they did not think about, or they did not know how to approach them. For example, when we just started, there was a real issue of COVID being a threat for many people with disabilities who have conditions that, medical conditions, right, that increased their exposure to being ill and extremely ill. And I think we saw that at the beginning, when I think communities and organizations didn't really know how to handle and what to do. I think within time, there were more answers and things that we did as a community that were better just by experience and just by seeing what people would need. So that changed. However, there are still other challenges that we had to face. For example, social distancing saved our lives in a way, but at the same time caused other challenges to groups and to people who may have not experienced mental health challenges before. Anxiety was one of them. People who did not, who couldn't adjust to this new world where everything is virtual, right? So that was a new challenge that I think we all had to face. But again, some people had more challenges with that than others. As a community, we just needed to see what we can do to make it better, to make the experience, like knowing that this is how it's going to look like without knowing when it's going to end. What do we do in the meantime? How do we make sure that those who experience anxiety, those who have mental health challenges, how do we still make sure that they are part of the community, that they still belong, that they have the belonging sense of that? How do we do that? And I think we've learned a lot. And I like to think of it as an opportunity with everything that happened in the past 1.5 years to grow, to add more levels to the caring, to the belonging sense. And I think that's how we should look at it, versus just, as something that I think we learned from it would be in person, but also acknowledge the fact that many people actually strive from being online because that works better for them. Right. So we need to make sure that we hear them, we ask them, what makes you feel belong, what makes you feel included? How are we as a community, as an organization, can support you? So again, I look at it as the goal is the same, it's just getting there might have changed, but I look at the good things that we can take from there, and I think we learned so much. And also as the Jewish community, with everything that happened, I feel there's a sense of it's always been, because it's part of who we are as a Jewish community, but I feel that it was stronger in a way. That and again, I really want to believe in from working with organizations, working with individuals, working with people with disabilities, working with families, hearing them and people sharing their experiences. We have a wonderful community, we have wonderful advocates, we have wonderful resources. We just need to make sure that we keep, you know, going and to the same goal. So I look at it as, again, as an opportunity to just reach the goal, but might be in different ways that we may have not thought about. And I think that's great.
We just want to remind folks, Renat is the Federation's inclusion and belonging person at the Federation, and she plays a very important role helping synagogues throughout the region with a wide range of activities. And I know Alan Levitt has been Adhd Shalom's liaison with Federation for a number of years. And we've learned a great deal, and I think we've made some contributions to them as well. We're running a little ahead, so we might have some time for some questions at the end. Let's continue with our third round of panelists, and I'm going to remind myself to include Rivka at the very end alphabetically. So Lauren, you're on.
Lauren,
Yeah.
I think you might be, there you go. Okay.
Okay. So the third question is, how have your experiences with the Adhd Shalom or other religious, educational, or social organizations changed during the pandemic? And is there a greater or lesser connection or sense of belonging? And so I'm going to fess up. I actually tested out services around the country. There were some rabbis that I was aware of that I had wanted to hear. I went to services at ICAR in California to hear Sharon Brous. I went to services at Romamu in New York to hear David Ingber and see what they were doing. And most regularly, actually now, I go to Friday night services at Central Synagogue. And again, you know, this is online in some way. And I want to talk a little bit about Central because they're remarkable. Their rabbi is Angela Buckdahl, and they've been doing online services for 10 years. So they did not pivot with COVID. They're very experienced and very well resourced in doing this. But one of the things that's really, really striking to me is that all of their clergy, when they're leading services, they acknowledge and welcome their online community. So here I am sitting in my family room watching them, and actually Rivka's point about interacting. So the Facebook live stream is interactive and people post things, but it is actually very much, you know, a one-way experience. But they deliberately make choices to speak to their online community. And as weird as it seems, I think, oh, that's me. It feels very inclusive. And I guess the point to me for Adhd Shalom, and I'm a former co-president. It's been so long ago that many of you may not know that, but I served as co-president of Adhd Shalom from 2006 to 2008. And I hope we won't feel like we have to reinvent the wheel ourselves. I hope that we will join in coalition with other synagogues that may have different ideas. There's also a Facebook group called Dreaming Up the Future, a Facebook group of spiritual leaders all around the country. So people are grappling with these questions. And of course we need to go internally, but I would hope that we would use all these marvelous resources and experiences that are out there and accessible all over the country. So my greater sense of belonging to the Jewish people as a people has been really expanded during this time.
That's remarkable, and I have many of the same reactions you do, and I'll briefly mention it. Matt?
Thanks. So I guess I'll answer the question sort of speaking on behalf of my family, because I think we had different experiences. I have kids who are 10 and 12, and I think that the entire experience for them has been very distancing from their Jewish learning and their sense of connection to Adhd Shalom, which has been really hard to see. But the Herculean efforts from the Torah school team to move activities online are very much appreciated by us as parents, not so much by our kids, who were just so worn out by being on Zoom all week that we really had to cajole them to participate, which is not usually the case. Usually they're super engaged with stuff happening at shul. So that's been challenging, and I can't wait to get them back in the building. And for my wife, who spends, pre-COVID, spent Saturday mornings kibitzing in the hallways and might occasionally cross the threshold into the sanctuary. Similarly, I think that a lot of friendships have sort of gone on pause, and a lot of the relationships have waned by not being there, which I think also has been a shame for her and difficult. I'm sort of more of the service goer, and so I've found the online services to be really interesting and intimate, and there's a lot about them that I've really enjoyed, and I hope that they continue, because I think that I'll continue to utilize that access point sometimes, as much as I also miss davening in person. So I think it's been a range of experiences. I think that I've really loved gazing at people's faces during services. I feel like I have this access to people that I never had before, many of whom I have never had a conversation with, but I feel closer to, and I think that has been really sweet.
Dina?
So for me, it might be a little bit different. I really appreciate what everyone has said so far. I have found, of course, Zoom makes it much more inclusive. It's really cool that there's some former members who are very involved who now live in Philadelphia who come, and I think that one of them was even part of our choir, right? Which could never happen before. And people who can't get to shul or who are in California or different parts of the country, and that's been wonderful. I find large Zoom gatherings that have multi-screens are harder for me to access. I do better with smaller things on one or two screens, but like Lauren, this opened up for me spiritual opportunities even beyond the Jewish community. So I became part of an online Buddhist mindfulness meditation community. It's been a wonderful complement to Adhd Shalom. It's not a replacement for Adhd Shalom, but it's an addition, and being on Zoom has allowed that. I do want to say one thing though about some of our clients and their accessibility. So for example, I had a client who was in a domestic violence situation. Being on Zoom allowed her to meet with me very readily. She could meet with me in her car. She could meet with me in a closet if she had to. I had clients who were Muslim whose parents would have forbidden them to be in any kind of therapy. They also could go out sit in their car or lock themselves in their room and talk softly. So this Zoom stuff, it allows us to have access and connections that we wouldn't otherwise have. For these Trump supporting Republicans, some of which were evangelical, it allowed them to be in therapy for the first time in their lives and have easy access and to begin to think outside of the box again in a very respectful way. So whether it's about Adhd Shalom or certain types of people who might have wanted to be in therapy but would have hesitated before, I think it's here to say, and what I'm hoping, Rivka, I really thought about what you said with the Passover Seder. I hope that more and more Jewish communities move to a hybrid model. Maybe there'll be a Passover Seder that will include some people who can get there in person, but there will also be available only online Seders. It's just one example because there's so many people for a variety of reasons who couldn't make it to a Seder. So I hope it's both and we can find a way to integrate that. Thanks.
Thanks, Dina. And Rivka, you've got the last word here.
Thank you. This has been very nice. So first of all, I do want to say that my family has been absolutely wonderful with regards to supporting me around my disability and my chronic illness. And I have gotten to attend some Passover Seders with my family. But what was hard was that I was the only one, attending via Zoom. And so it was always sort of like I was perched up on the, on the cabinet and looking down at this Zoom happening. It was great to be there, but it was not the same as when everybody was on Zoom. And that was a really fun experience. And I do hope that happens again. So for me, this has changed my relationship to the shul. Absolutely. My shul, the Jewish community of Amherst, 110%. I was a member of my shul for 7 years, but could barely get there because of my chronic illness. And again, I just want to say, just to raise awareness, it's called ME, myalgic encephalomyelitis. The government officially calls it ME/CFS, myalgic encephalomyelitis/chronic fatigue syndrome, but patients don't like the term chronic fatigue syndrome because we're not just fatigued. It's a whole host of symptoms that really impact our lives, and it ranges from mild to moderate to severe. So some of us can be so sick that we can't even be around any lights, noise, touch, and we're bedridden for years at a time. So I'm considered moderate. But because of my moderate chronic illness with ME, I couldn't get to the shul even though I was a member for 7 years, and it was only a 10-minute drive down the road. So my relationship to the shul has changed completely. Since Zoom, I now have close relationships with people. I'm part of a committee. I'm part of the disability non-exclusion committee. And I do want to say that we did have a panel similar to this. It was almost 60 people came, and we talked about disability issues, and we're raising the awareness of my entire congregation around these issues. And in fact, now it's even bigger because the Synagogue Council of Massachusetts, so they are like the coalition of all the synagogues in Massachusetts. They are going to have a similar panel discussion talking about, actually, we're going to talk specifically about the difference between unidirectional live stream participation and multi-access participation. So anyway, I just wanted to say that my relationship so I got sick right around the same, I was raised by artist activist parents who were dedicated to Tikkun Olam, but we didn't go into synagogues very often. And I started to embrace my Judaism more in my 20s. So although I was raised pretty secular, I started to embrace my Judaism around the same time that I became disabled. So I didn't get access really to a Jewish community until the pandemic. Crazy that something so horrific as this pandemic opened up the world for people like me. Thank you.
Thank you, Rivka. We are going to pivot a little bit. We didn't think we were going to have enough time at the end for
Robert, let me interrupt for just a second. I hope everybody has the chat box open because there's interesting conversation in the chat.
Yes. And to remind people, this is being recorded and at some point will be made available on the Adhd Shalom website. We're not sure.
Beats me somewhere.
Yes, I think so. There's usually a link to the recording on the Adhd Shalom website.
Okay, so I'm going to ask that if people have questions, that you either put it in the chat or raise your hand. I did want to make one quick comment. I'm backing up what Lauren said. I've watched Central Synagogue, Temple Emmanuel Friday nights when normally we're not in services Friday nights, and so that's been a plus. But we've learned so much more of the resources in the Jewish community around the United States, around the world, literally. And the Stryker Center out of Temple Manuel has wonderful presentations. The Classrooms Without Borders, a Jewish Federation of Pittsburgh, Jewish historical seminars, just a wealth of opportunities to learn about Jewish life or outside of America, to do tours that you otherwise might be doing in person, but might not. And if you, in Rivka's case, you probably never would be traveling outside the United States. And here's an opportunity to learn from really top-notch experts about life in Kazakhstan or London or Argentina. So that's, for me, that's been a wonderful experience. So Matt, how do you want to handle it as far as questions go?
Everyone is muted at the moment. This is a reasonably well-behaved crowd. If you want, there's a raise hand function at the bottom of your screen, or you can just unmute and ask a question, or you can type it into the chat box and I will read it, or Robert will read it.
Don't be shy.
I said you were reasonably well-behaved. I didn't say you were shy.
Yeah.
Susan has a question. Susan, unmute yourself.
I was going to suggest that if the panelists want to discuss some of the issues that came up this morning amongst themselves, I think that would be another, very welcome to do that, because there were so many really significant points made. But I see that questions are coming in, so maybe we should start there.
How about Bobby Osbell?
Hi, I'm a parent of Naomi Edelson. And I just want to recognize that I live in a senior community. There are many homebound people. And you know what? We're all getting older. We're not getting younger, no matter how old we are. So there's a whole community out there that we will join maybe someday. And it would be great for people to be able to continue at that time of our lives, which is when we probably need the synagogue a lot, to be able to access the synagogue. And I do think it's important to have it participatory. And I love the discussion. Thank you, everybody who's talked.
Lauren, go ahead.
Yeah.
You got your phone and your computer on. Lauren, I think now we don't hear you.
Okay.
There we
Now,
go. Perfect.
okay. My question is for Rivka. Given that there is some tension between the need for people to be in person and the real desire for all of us to include folks like you and everybody else who needs to not be in person, what in your mind is sort of the let's just say the ideal Seder? Like, given some people want to be in person, and what would work for you?
Yeah, I have no idea. So, I mean, I don't know the answer to that. And by the way, I should say sometimes I can get out of the house and I can get to a Seder, but I might not be able to last the whole time, or I might have to be lying down. But but the question that you have is larger, how to include people. And I don't know, some people in the disability community I've spoken with said that they don't want separate but equal. They don't want to be in a separate synagogue of only people who are on Zoom or something like that, or they don't want two shuls within a synagogue where one is on Zoom and the other is in person. I don't know the answer, and there are smart people in the disability community who are thinking about this and hopefully writing about it. Also, we also need to have smart people in the technology community figure it out. Someone was telling me about a device called Owl. You know how Owl, Naomi could tell us more as the ornithologist in our midst, but owls can turn their heads around. Owl is a device like Zoom that you place in the middle of a table, and it then will pivot and turn to whoever it is that's speaking. There's another device that's bigger than Owl, and it's like an owl, but for a large room. So I think that, and there's something else called pivot, tilt, lean, or something like that. So these are all technologies that I don't yet know about, but that will allow for the participation that I think that we're all hoping will happen. But you have an excellent question, Lauren, and I'm not the person who's thought well about it.
Alan, I see you raise your hand.
I think it's important to note first of all, I think hundreds of synagogues around the country are going through the same kind of discussion. The Federation is well aware of the importance of access through Zoom or other digital ways. And I think it's a major thing. And I know our inclusion committee for several years have advocated to the board the importance of having, I guess we have a pre-digital mindset, or at least I do, but having meetings that could be accessed from home, because there are some people who have mobility problems or can't drive, or they have scheduling problems and don't want to spend the time going back and forth. And what it does when you have access like that is that it increases the participation in for various committees, religious practices, social action, education, climate change, and partnerships with other organizations. And it's a way to communicate and connect. And I think that's really important. And I hope and I don't think Adhd Shalom is going to go back to the old way. And I think I forgot who it was, but actually a couple of people today have mentioned the technology, the importance of having knowledge and experience in addressing these kinds of issues. We have a little way further to go at Adhd Shalom on that. That's it.
I just want to say that Adhd Shalom should be very proud of how far they have come. I mean, you guys are Susan was telling me that since 2013, you've been focusing on this issue. My shul is just starting to. So I think you all should give yourselves a real pat on the back for having spent, a decade now, or almost a decade, raising awareness. So you've been doing great.
Well,
But we're causers.
thank you so much, really, Rivka. And I just want to point out, when the synagogue was built, we were aware enough to have a ramp to the Bima, so that is possible from day one. There was access, but under Alan's guidance, he developed that we could have a reading desk for the Torah at wheelchair height. So we have that available now too. And so it really are trying to provide accommodations and accessibility wherever we can. We've made some other types of adjustments, having pegs for the talit at wheelchair height, and the mezuzah at the front door, and other at a lower height. So really recognizing that there are all varieties of need. But this is just a beginning. It's really the feeling of belonging and the participation that really is key to making the congregation really be more open and welcoming to people with all sorts of disabilities.
Susan, we were also foresighted enough to wire the sanctuary for a
Absolutely.
camera.
Well, for the camera, and I thought you were going to say the audio loop. The audio loop had FM signal
Yeah.
broadcast. So it goes straight to, if you have the right kind of hearing aid, it goes straight into your hearing aid. And we've upgraded it. That has been improved since the original one from 20 years ago.
You know, I'm going to take my my chair of this event seriously. I'm going to ask Mark Zweig, who I see here, to comment, because I know, Mark, you've been very active attending services online, and I'd like to get your reaction to what you heard today, if you don't mind. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm going to.
Hi. Actually, there is something I've been thinking about in the last few minutes. Carol and I have also, like Lauren, been regulars at Central Synagogue for this entire period of time, and have come to really like doing that. And one of the things I noticed is that they are able to bring in people from their congregation who aren't present on the screen, so that they're in a way, it makes it more like Zoom than just streaming. And I think that makes a big difference, and perhaps that's something we ought to think about doing, so that those people who are at home could say something, do something, just be more participatory than being an observer.
I'd like to say something too. At Central, the cameras are close to the clergy, so we're zooming in on them, and there have been so many emotional moments where they are struggling to say something without crying sometimes, and it's so intimate and beautiful. And then there have been long shots of their sanctuary, and you realize that if you were there in person, you wouldn't have that intimacy at all. You'd be far, far, far away from them. So I'm enjoying it, Central, and I'm loving the idea that we might have hybrid meeting services at Adhd Shalom. I think some people who could go in person might prefer to stay home and be more on the bima.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think the way that they have multiple camera angles and camera shots is very helpful. Sometimes they focus on the couple of people who are present, who are singing along, their choir, it's a small number of people, or the musicians. There may be a shot of the musicians. So you get a much more involved video of what's going on. The other thing is that they often do a Shehekianu there. I guess that's a regular part of Friday night. And oftentimes you get a shot of somebody from home who's also singing along, and sometimes even sort of dancing. And that adds a lot to it as well. And it just brings everybody to a greater extent. I don't know what the technology is and whether they have to go to a lot of trouble to take something to somebody's house, set it up and take it home that night or what, but it seems to me that there are opportunities to bring more people into it in a way that goes beyond what we're usually accustomed to with normal streaming.
Mark and Carol, thanks so much. That's something we're going to explore, definitely. And maybe we'll make a phone call up there to New York and try and get started. Matt, you had your hand up.
Matt Beal? No, yes?
No,
Not intentionally, sorry. I was just...
Okay. Who else would like to comment? Ori, I saw you had a note in the chat room.
David Saratsky.
David wants to say something.
David Saratsky. Emily Novick. Go ahead.
Well, sorry about the screen name. It's the two of us, but I'm David Saratsky. We've started a program of a twice a week weekday minyan, Mondays and Thursdays. And I haven't done this scientifically, but I'd be surprised if there are very many other Reconstructionist synagogues doing a Reconstructionist weekday morning shacharit 2 days a week. And it's not a huge group, but it usually ranges between 15 and 20 people. And it would never, ever happen if it weren't for Zoom, ever. because first of all, we have a couple people from Toronto, some snowbirds from Florida who dial in during the winter, a very regular person who comes in from North Carolina, but also those of us in the DC area. We'd never be able to get to Adhd Shalom in the morning if we were driving to Adhd and then going to work, but I can go to shul and then hit a button and I'm at work. So this is the other thing, is that not just participation in existing programs that are happening online, but it facilitates new programs that could never happen in real life, IRL. So I'm a huge, I really like Zoom, and I think that this is another example of what is the word for
Universal design.
universal design, because this is something that makes it available to people who can't get out of their houses, and even to those who can but would find it inconvenient to do so. So just another thought to throw into the mix.
That's an excellent point. I wanted to add also, I participated in a weekly Talmud study class from a synagogue in Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts.
Mm.
I used to go there in person. We're leaving tomorrow for Martha's Vineyard. I used to go in person, but I can't during the year. And now I've been able to sit on a class that I could never do. And I'm sure there are other things like that we don't even know.
And I've been taking classes in New York and in Jerusalem and all over. So another example.
And
Classes
sorry.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. So I'll just give a shout out to my synagogue, the Jewish Community of Amherst. We are continuing to do morning and evening services online remotely every day. We've been doing it for a year and a few months. And I agree, it's been absolutely wonderful. And people said that they wouldn't have been able to do that without for Zoom. So technology has been a real blessing.
Okay, I know there are, well, yes, would you speak up?
I was just
I don't
going
want
to
to,
say,
I don't want to, oh, Susan. Go ahead, Susan.
just a little add-on about going to services at Adhd Shalom. One of my favorite parts is the breakout sessions afterwards, because it's a sort of a random, you don't know, to me, it's like getting the box of chocolates. You don't know who's going to be in your breakout session. It's always a great surprise, and you get to have some very condensed but very real and intense interaction with friends, and it's just wonderful. Or get to meet new people in a way, as we're saying, face to face. You really get to see people up close. So in terms of social isolation, it's one thing to look forward to, that you get both the service and the interaction. And go ahead, Orit. Sorry to interrupt you.
You are muted.
Yes, I'm muted. I just wanted to say my understanding, I think the word that was used a lot during this video was that like Central has a lot of resources. And I think people were talking about money. And my understanding is to have even, I think what we have right now, the cameras, the sound equipment, like the equipment and the technology related to hybrid is expensive. And to have more of that will be more expensive. And I'm concerned, and what I've understood is that our membership, there are membership issues. And so that's related to finances, right? And the future is also, if we're going to be hybrid, our membership fee is going to be different if you're only on Zoom or if you're on Zoom and in person. And so I think it boils down to finances, ultimately, is what my understanding is, and to the technology ability of people at our synagogue, or what we can learn from others. I don't know how many members Central Synagogue has, but I suspect more than us. So I think it also comes down to a financial concern, and
Of course,
how do we build leadership?
If you have it accessible, more accessible, then this is Rivka, great point, Orit. If you have it accessible and more members join, and they might be able to, contribute financially. There's also, it used to be that the Ruderman Family Foundation was, supporting accessibility with regards to synagogues. I don't know if they still are or not. And before people start leaving, I see people said that they might be leaving. I just want to say that my email address is in the chat, and anybody should feel free to reach out to me if you're so inclined.
And is it possible to save the chat and either post it on the listserv or just send it to us today? Because there was a lot of interesting information and I wasn't able to copy it all.
We're going to try and figure that out. It is being
I am
recorded.
saving the chat.
The
I
chat,
am, yeah.
okay, the chat will be saved. This isn't my account, it's Adhd Shalom's account, so I'm not sure where it gets saved, but we can figure that out later.
Matt, could you also put up the next to last slide?
Yeah.
Just a little.
Is it there?
Yeah.
So this is a description of what the Synagogue's Inclusion Advisory Committee, not the non-exclusion, but we're the Inclusion Committee for now. And just to give you a feel for the issues that we are looking at, it's not just about disability, it's about making people feel comfortable about coming to services or getting involved. Programs like this that reach out to people and so on. And then Matt, if you'll include the last slide. So this is information if you want to reach out to any of us that we have email addresses, and Renat's email is again for the Jewish Federation. If there are no last minute or additional questions or comments, I just want to do a quick closing and just want to thank everybody for coming out, so to speak, on Zoom, not out physically, but to come and listen and learn. And again, we encourage participation of anybody who wants to contribute. I think that all of those enhancements that we have didn't come out of the blue. They came out because people wanted to make sure that accessibility and inclusion was a priority for the synagogue, and certainly the rabbis, the cannors, everybody is aware of that, and so that we are doing as much as we can. And Alan and Susan, I don't know if you want to make any last minute comments as well.
It was delicious.
Well, it was quite a smorgasbord. We had such a range of points of view and experiences and people's backgrounds. And I think going from general ideas and, with the clinical practices of very diverse populations to Rivka's very own personal statements about her experiences were just opened our minds in different ways and was wonderful. So thank you very, very much. We really appreciate all the effort and thought that went into it. And we look forward to seeing you in other events that are sponsored by the Inclusion Committee, because inclusion is a really important thing about being at Adhd Shalom.
And
And many thanks to Matt, because we couldn't have done it without him.
one other point, if anybody has any suggestions for additional inclusion efforts at Adhd Shalom, let us know.
And again, a word of thanks to our panelists who really put their minds to the questions, and I can't thank them enough, and particularly Rivka, who we weren't sure was going to be able to make it or not, and Renat, who couldn't be here in person, and Judy Tyson, who could not be here in person. We want to thank them also for their efforts. Okay, let's go on and have a good day.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Bob. That was great.
You might want to turn off
Thank you.
the
Yeah, we
recording.
can turn off the recording.